Hi, this is Erma Grego from Senior Perspective. We have really a treat for you today. I have several guests that have done some artwork and as their hobbies and also as a profession. And I'd like to introduce to you my first guest, Peg Frickencher.
Hello. Nice to have you here.
Peg, how did you get started in art?
At a very early age. I can't remember a time when I didn't draw or paint. Started in high school, really.
Were you one of the doodlers?
Doodlers?
Yeah. Where you doodle whenever you don't know what's going to come out.
I guess so, yes.
Okay. Where did you go to art school?
I attended the Cleveland School of Art on a part-time basis, and as a result of that, I took my little portfolio around and got my first job in the art world at Higbee's department store in Cleveland, Ohio, on the art staff of the advertising department. If I may, I have a couple samples of the type of work I did. I specialized mainly in accessories, shoes, and handbags. And these are samples of the newspaper ads that we did for Higbee's.
That was more like a commercial art then, what you were doing?
Very much so.
Mm-hmm.
Probably one reason I wanted to show these is some people have the misconception that the people who do abstract art do abstract because they can't draw. And I don't agree with that. For me, abstract is more creative. I like all types of art. I enjoy all types, but I do like the abstract. It's for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds very interesting. Now, could we talk a little bit about your family? Could you tell me, are there any artists in your family besides yourself?
Yes, in different ways. We have a son and two daughters. Our son is very good with a camera. He takes very well composed photographs. Our older daughter lives in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with her husband and son, and she is a very accomplished artist, although right now she's a career woman and doesn't have much time for it. And our younger daughter lives in Nairobi, Kenya with her husband and 3 children. And they are with Campus Crusade for Christ, and he teaches at the School of Theology there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was wondering when we had talked before what he really did out there, so it must be pretty interesting to be able to do something like that.
Yes, they're very dedicated.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you've got some very interesting children doing interesting things.
We have lots of places to travel.
Oh, that's wonderful. So, okay, now, what was your first painting that you sold?
A long time ago, I sold a small watercolor of a sailboat on the ocean, which reminds me when I graduated from high school, my art teacher wrote in my yearbook, "Please keep up your nice, clean watercolors." And I haven't painted in watercolors since. I use oil on canvas.
Mm-hmm. Well, that seems to be a little more difficult than the watercolors, is it not?
No, there's a controversy. Actually, doing watercolors can be more difficult than oils, I think.
Well, how do you when you do watercolors, how do you control it from, like going too far, or do you just? I'm not too much in painting in that.
Well, I don't know. I don't do watercolors. I might mention that my painting is action painting. I paint flat. I don't have an easel. And I move my canvas around as I paint. When I first started doing that, I felt guilty, as though I were cheating. But an artist that I admired very much, Richard Beeman, had an article in the newspaper, and he said, "The less control, the better." And I thought, if he said that, it must be true. So I didn't feel guilty anymore. And I also watched Nat Youngblood do a demonstration, and he did that too. He picked up his canvas, and I thought, if he can do it, I can do it.
You can do it too, then. Well, do you seem to have more control with it that way, then,
Well,
with
as
the
I say,
painting?
the less control, the better. If you notice, most of my paintings don't have brushwork. Some of them do, and the ones that have brushwork are not as successful as the ones that don't. Could I mention how I got into this type of painting?
Oh, by all means.
I owe a great deal to McMurray Art League, because years ago they had a seminar at the Crossroads. It was a critique class, because each week our instructor, Bill Fairman, would assign a different medium to work in. We didn't do any work in class, but we would bring our work in, and he would critique what we had done during the week, and then he would assign another medium for the next week. And this is how I started doing this style. Mm-hmm. And I, took off like a big bird. It was just right for me. Mm-hmm. I wanted to show you this collage because this is one of my other interests, is duplicate bridge, which we play often. These are all playing cards, and I cut them out of Smithsonian Magazine. Each card was created by a different artist. This one happens to be the Jack of Diamonds with Jackie Robinson. I love that one. We have the Six of Hearts up here, the Four of Clubs. I know these are hard to see from there, but anyhow, it's another part of my life, as well as the paintings, as a duplicate bridge. This is a sample of the type of work I did for years and years before I got into the abstract. This is the covered bridge at Mingo Park, and it was done a long time ago.
Peg, I'd like to thank you very much for showing us around to all your beautiful paintings.
You're welcome.
And perhaps there's something else you would like to tell us about?
Well, I would like to say that I think that art is a very rewarding hobby, both emotionally and financially. It also, I think artists observe more of the world. They just are tuned into the trees, the clouds, the sky. They're just more observant. I've been very fortunate because I had an agent in Pittsburgh for many years. Her name is Laudra Ferris, and she and her husband are retired now and live in Florida, but she was very good for me, sold my paintings to banks, and there's an apartment on Washington, Mount Washington, that has a lot of mine in the lobby.
Oh, how interesting.
And I've found it a very rewarding hobby, and very grateful.
Well, it seems so strange how some little thing that an artist can elaborate on. I have a little story I want to tell you. At one point, I used to have a little vegetable stand at my home, and all I did was put a couple blocks up and some boards and put the produce out and flower plants and stuff. And this one artist came over and was painting that. And, well, it didn't look like anything to me whenever it was there, but when it was finished, I mean, it looked like it was great. And
See, that's what I mean about...
I mean, they can see more than what we can.
Exactly.
So that would sort of bring out the point what you were trying to say.
I should mention, too, I have a favorite art book. The name of it is No More Secondhand Art. Right now, the author's name escapes me. I'm sorry, but it's a very interesting book to read.
Well, thank you very, very much, Peg. It was very interesting.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
I would now like to introduce my second guest, Gwen, well, guests really, Gwen and Bob Hockenberg. And Gwen is the painter, and Bob does wood carving. So I would like to talk to Gwen first, and then we'll take Bob. What originally sparked your interest in art, Gwen?
Well, it starts back when I was about 10 years old, and I seemed to have a tendency to be able to do fairly decent artwork, sketching, and some painting. So I went to Saturday morning art classes at the Art Museum, and I did that for 2 or 3 years, and then they invited me back to come in the summertime to do watercolors outside, and that's where I actually started with watercolor.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And is that what you prefer then, is watercoloring?
well, I do, because it's something that I know better, really, than oils or other media.
Mm-hmm.
So I
really
enjoy
didn't
that.
realize how many types of paintings there really are until I started talking to you folks.
Yes, it's cool.
And when did you say your interest in the watercoloring?
Oh, that began when I was in high school, and then continued on into college. Really, I went to the University of Cincinnati and majored in costume design, but in so doing, we were working with watercolor, and our one professor would take us out on field trips during the summer. I went to school for 5 years. This was a co-op course that they have there, where you work half the time and go to school half the time.
Oh,
So for a while I had a job in the area in which I was interested, working at a dressmaking company, and I saw how the patterns were laid out, you know, and how you go about making clothes.
Well, you were saying you did costume designing?
Yeah,
would
that was
be
my
for,
major.
for the plays and...
For plays and for, you know, dresses, you know, fashion wear, actually.
Well, that sounds very interesting.
It was interesting. I loved it.
And when did you switch to watercolors then?
Well, as I say, I did do some watercolors. I mean, we used watercolor when we would make up sketches, you know, for of costumes. So
Yeah, before the pattern could be made, then you had to have the idea.
yeah, that's right. You start out with an idea and work it, develop it, you know, and then figure out how it would be made. So
So
I really
it was
enjoyed
pretty
doing
interesting making the patterns then.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, it really was.
so, do you do it when you make the patterns? Are they made on this thin paper, like?
Yes, it would be like similar to tissue paper, but a little bit stronger than that. But I continued. I didn't really get into costume design per se, but when we were married and had our family and the girls were growing up, I would make all their clothes and I'd make mine, of course. And, oh, I made my clothes from the time I was about 12 or 13. Now, I guess that was the reason that I wanted to get into that. My mother had taught me to sew, and so I did quite a few articles of clothing. And then when our daughters were in high school, they began to have the drill team at the Peters Township High School. And so I was the first one to design costumes for all the girls.
Oh, wonderful.
And then help them make them too.
Yeah.
So that was fun.
Yes,
I enjoyed that.
yeah. Are they using the same costumes today, or
No,
they've
they've changed the
They've changed as time goes on.
Yes. They changed with the times.
Now, when you're painting, how do you plan a painting before you start it?
Well, I would do a sketch of it, black and white sketch, and get my lights and darks and medium tones figured out before I begin to paint, so that you have a well-balanced, a well-planned painting, I should say.
And then you fill in with your colors and that. Then is that how?
Well,
it's
then
done?
you do it on watercolor paper, and if I were in the other room, I could show you some of the materials that I use.
Yeah, well, we'll see that in a little bit then.
Okay, that'll be fine.
So, materials you use now, is that other than brushes and stuff like that?
Well, no, you use a lot of different brushes, different size
Yeah,
brushes.
different one for every color.
Yeah, almost. But yes, but there's different ways of using paint too. I mean, for watercolor, quite often you will put in a wash, a light wash of a particular color. If you were doing a landscape, it would be the blues or whatever you see in the sky. You'd start out with that, a wash for that. Or you could put a wash over the whole painting and then develop it from there.
You put a wash in. What do you mean by a wash?
A wash is just a light coloring.
Wet?
Wet. Oh yeah, very wet.
Oh, very wet.
Yes. So.
Well, and then before you can start actual painting, does that have to dry then, or?
Yes, part of it would have to dry, but when you have a wash, you can develop some of the painting, you know, just like there is negative painting, and you can go around something, say something, a flower or something would be white, and you would just paint around that, and then you could get some nice darks in the background, you know, while the paper is wet, and that's how it develops.
Sounds very interesting. Okay, now, when your painting is completed, how do you finish it in order for it to be shown?
Well, watercolors are always finished with a matte and sometimes a double matte where you would have a liner inside the outer part. And of course you can either use glass to cover it. You do need something like that, either glass or acrylic. And then you use a frame that would be appropriate to the painting. And you put a backing on it. So
it's ready to go.
That's pretty much what I do too. I do the whole thing, you know. If it's a metal frame, I will be able to put that together myself because it comes with everything ready to put
Oh.
together, if you know the size.
You mean the frame, you have to measure the frame and everything,
Oh,
put it
yes,
together?
you have to know your measurements very well. And sometimes it's kind of ticklish to figure out the size of the mat, you know, so it will look proper in the frame and with the painting.
Well, you have to have so much of a border.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
So I might turn out to be knowing what I'm talking about.
It takes a lot of work, I'll tell you, especially those mats.
Oh.
I'm not the greatest mat cutter, but it usually works out okay.
Well, perhaps now you would like to show us some of your materials and some of your paintings.
Yes, I would be happy to.
Okay.
Okay. This is a painting that is in progress now, and as you can see, it's a wood scene, and I would like to develop so that I have sunlight coming through the trees, and I want to keep this part light and show how the sunlight and shadows would be through the trees. And I'll develop this a little more in detail. And I want to give the effect that you're walking in through the woods and you would go back into here, so that your eye would follow through to enjoy the whole painting. I work with a lot of different size brushes. These are some of them that I use. This is a good one for a large wash. And then when you're getting down to fine detail, then you use a smaller brush, of course. So I have a lot of paints, and this is my palette that I use. And I use a jar of water, or a spray can of water, I should say, to re-wet sometimes, or just to give an unusual effect once in a while. This is for the sunlight coming down in here. And this is a pathway leading into the painting. I want to put some more darks in there. And hopefully it looks like a well-planned painting. This painting is very interesting to me because it was done of the Taos Pueblo on at the Taos Reservation out in New Mexico. My husband and I had traveled out there one year, some time ago, and we visited this Pueblo. It was most interesting because of the way the Indians live on the reservation. They have these ovens that are like a dome type thing. And then they have these upright poles, and they use that to dry things on the top of it. It's almost like a roof intertwined with some kind of lattice work. And they have their wood all bound up there to build a fire with. And the mountains were in the background. It was a very enjoyable time to see that, and so different for us because it was such an unusual spot.
Well, Bob, now it's your turn. So we've talked to Gwen. Now we're going to talk to you about your wood carving. So when did you start your wood carving?
Well, I started my wood carving after I retired, but I've been interested in woodworking all my life, I guess. My father was a carpenter, and when I was 6 years old, he built our first house. When I was in high school, he built our second house, and I helped him build that. And he sold that, and we built another house. So I've always been interested in woodworking. I learned a lot from him.
Mm-hmm.
And I have done woodworking most of my life. But carving I started after I retired.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, what's the difference between woodworking and carving?
Well, after I came home from the war, we decided to build our house ourselves, and so I've done most of the work you see in this house. And woodworking is building different pieces of cabinets and furniture, and the furniture you saw in the other room were built for the children by me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the difference between the carving and the woodworking.
The carving is more of a showpiece or something.
Yes, it's more detailed and small, and just more of an artistic piece.
Mm-hmm. So I've seen some of your work that you've done here, and it's really beautiful.
Well, thank you.
And you were talking about a grandfather's clock you made.
Yes.
Would you mind explaining that to us and showing it to us?
Well, it's here in the room, and I built that from a set of plans from wood that I got from the Laurel Highlands. It's a walnut wood, and the works I ordered from Mason Sullivan in New York. It's a German-made all-brass works. So I just made it from the plan and did the carving that I thought would look good on it. This is a green frog that I carved, and I think he's carved from white pine wood too. And the lily pad is carved from a piece of boxwood.
And you put them together.
Yeah, the
glued them
frog
together?
then is attached to the lily pad.
Look at those eyes on there, how they stand up.
Well, that's the way they do on
That's
a real frog.
Yeah. Okay, how about your little balancing bird? That's really cute there.
Oh, this little bird is a balancing chickadee, I think. And he sits on a little limb and he can swing back and forth. So
Oh, that's really neat.
it's just a novelty. This is my hummingbird getting a little nectar from the flower. And it's all wood, I think, but the leaves. This is a piece of driftwood. So he's looks somewhat like a real hummingbird. And then I decided to carve a couple of bookends, and I tried to make them look like a bald eagle. And I carved two of them. They are also of walnut. And this is my carving.
All this is done by your carving?
The texturing of the feathers is done by hand with carving tools, yes.
Mm-hmm.
The eyes are purchased and set in.
The beak, is that carved out of the wood then?
That's all one piece of wood.
Oh.
But the stand is two pieces of wood.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decided to carve a covey of geese here. And I haven't painted them, but this is the boss, and he's looking up in the sky for a red-tailed hawk, I think. So nobody gets harmed. He's keeping a lookout.
That's very interesting. I still can't believe how you don't knock their necks off or something when you're doing that. I think it's really great. Oh, you were going to tell us about your cane.
Oh, yeah, my cane. My father found this vine. I think it's a vine that grew around a slender tree of some kind, I think. And he found that about 50 years ago or more. And I kept it for a long time after he passed away and decided maybe I should make a cane from it. So I took a piece of walnut wood and attached it to one end and then carved the cobra head on it. And of course a snake has a lighter underside than the back. And I textured the scales and made him look somewhat like a snake, I hope.
Yep, he does.
This is my carving station, and I have a leather strop that I keep my knives honed to a razor sharp edge because you can't carve with them unless they're sharp. I have a high-speed grinder here, and I have burrs to put in it so that I can remove wood fast. I also have a Fordham tool for smaller burrs and cutters that do finer work. And I have a Dremel tool also which does fine work. So it saves time when you're just roughing out carvings. This is Lakota Sioux teepee. And I built a small model of it to show how they lived and how they put the poles in and how they close their flaps. This is tied to a pole out here, and when it rains, they untie it and close these up to keep the rain out. And this is a liner that fits inside of the tent, which I don't have in there yet. It also creates a draft that keeps the smoke coming out the top, and also provides insulation in cold weather. I have painted all the designs, and I painted the teepee. This is a Lakota Sioux dog. He's guarding the place. So that's about as far as I've gotten with it. And I didn't gather them. My father picked them up over the years, long ago. The small arrowheads like this were used for birds.
Oh, I gave you one.
You weren't recording me, were you? No. And the larger ones were used for larger animals, like deer and probably buffalo for big ones. These were skinning knives, I believe. And this too, because they don't have the groove around them like a tomahawk would have. This was a small skinning knife. This is a geode. That has nothing to do with Indians, but I don't know what it is. Just a geode, I think. These are some of the carving tools that I use. The knives must be sharp as a razor to carve and to keep from cutting yourself. If they're not sharp, you're apt to cut yourself. And some of these I have purchased. Some of them I have made myself. All of these I made. The different shaped gouges I purchase, and I also have some miniature gouges, palm gouges, which are used for finer work. These windmills are used to grind grain, they're used to saw wood, They're used to pump water. And if the wind changes, the miller will bring his horse up here and untie this rope from the ground and turn the windmill into the wind again. It also can be disassembled. This windmill will come out and the cap will come off. It's just the way I put it together. So they were very useful in Holland, I'm sure, and also they were brought to the Americas, to the United States and Canada in the early days to provide power for different purposes. This is a box that I built with dovetail joints. It's called a chip carved box. It has a different design on the front, on the ends, on the back, and on the top. It's made out of mahogany wood. It has a tray in it with a music box. Can be used for a jewelry box. So it was another project of mine. This is my red bird, and I did not carve the seeds. They're real, but I carved the bird and made the base. When we were in Alaska, I saw totem poles, so I had to carve a little totem pole. I think that's carved out of white pine, too. Also, I gave myself a chance to carve an Indian head. I think that's carved from aspen wood, which I picked up in the Rocky Mountains. It has a design on the base, just to give it a little more character. Here's a balancing bird.
My favorites are the blue.
These are little pins.
Small birds.
Some more boxes I carved. Here's a bear that just caught a fish. Shoes, pelicans, pigs, dogs.
I'd like to thank both of you very much for all your expertise in that. And I learned a lot this afternoon, and all the carvings and the paintings, and which are very, very interesting. And thank you both very much. And we'll see you at another time.
Well, you're welcome. We're very happy that you came to see
Yes,
our hobbies.
We enjoyed having you very much.
Thank you. No more than I did. Thank you.